I just posted a video about the 5 reasons why things are getting better for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. That being said, things are not perfect. And I hate to say it, there's a lot of ways and a lot of reasons that things are actually getting worse for drivers. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 ways that things are getting significantly worse for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. Number 1, self-driving cars. This is the biggest one I'm going to say right off the bat for a bunch of different reasons. In the beginning, and this is important to understand, in the beginning you had Uber and Lyft versus taxis, right? Rideshare drivers versus taxi drivers. Uber and Lyft won. Then you had Uber versus Lyft. There are other companies out there like Rides and Power, but basically Uber versus Lyft. Rideshare company versus rideshare company. Then you had Uber and Lyft versus Waymo. Waymo right now is by far the biggest self-driving car company. It's in like Los Angeles, Phoenix, San Francisco. It's going to be soon in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York, Atlanta, Austin, Denver. The list goes on and on. It's spreading everywhere, spreading like crazy. You have Uber and Lyft now versus Waymo in a lot of these areas. But now it's even going a step further where you have Waymo versus Zoox, for example. Zoox just debuted in Vegas. They're doing free rides at designated pickup and drop-off locations. And that's kind of like a crazy dystopian Black Mirror style thinking. But now we have self-driving car company versus another self-driving car company. It's the same thing now if you look at like AI, where you have like ChatGPT versus Google Gemini versus Claude versus... It's kind of crazy how fast technology is moving with AI. And this is a big issue, I'm going to say, for drivers for 2 big reasons. Especially if you live in one of these areas, like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Austin, Denver. The list goes on. And Waymo's continuing to spread like crazy. One, they're taking rides off the road. If you think about it, right? If let's say this only, and I'm making numbers up, I don't know what the exact number would be, but take like here in LA. Let's say there's 10,000 rides happening every day. I'm just making that number up. I don't know what it is. Let's say it's 10,000. You have a higher and higher percentage of those rides now being taken by Waymo. Meaning there's way less rides to go around for all the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers out there. I'm going to be honest, if you are a driver in these areas, Waymo is a massive concern for you. And if it's not, it should be. Even something like Vegas, where it just has Zoox is still very small. They're doing testing. I think of it like the beta stage. They're free rides, but it's still in the beta stage, but it should be on your radar. Waymo is spreading incredibly rapidly. And not only that, the faster that Waymo spreads, the better they get of how to kind of penetrate a new market, develop, and move forward. The more attention that Waymo gets, the better, the bigger and better it gets. And these are things that are happening a lot. In addition, in case you didn't know, Waymo, their car is what I'm going to call it a remixed Jaguar I-Pace. So they have to purchase the vehicle and then remix it, and then they put it on their fleet. They're now, I think it's the 6th generation Waymo, which might come out later this year, beginning of next year. They're making on their own. So now Waymo doesn't really have to go to a third-party car company. They're making their cars in-house, which makes it quicker and faster for them to spread. That's the first thing. They're taking significantly more rides off the road. The second big thing, and this is a big one for numerous different reasons, people are now preferring Waymo over Uber and Lyft. That is a big one. We did an entire meta-analysis and found that on average, Waymo is more expensive than Ubers and Lyfts. I will say this, that it's becoming not the case. I will say for me, I sometimes check Uber, Lyft, and Waymo when I'm going out. It's at the point now where about half the time, Waymo's cheaper. Before, it was like 10% of the time Waymo's cheaper. Now it's about half the time. So Waymo's getting cheaper and cheaper, but even still right now, Waymo is on average still more expensive than Ubers and Lyfts. That being said, they found that even though Waymo is more expensive, people are still preferring Waymo to Uber and Lyft, even if they have to pay an upcharge. That is a big deal. That means it's almost like once someone gets hooked on getting a Waymo, they're not looking back. So not only are they taking rides in general from human drivers, but they're doing so at an exponential rate because once on average, statistically speaking, once someone takes a Waymo, they're just going to only take a Waymo from now on. And they're going to prefer it. And for a lot of people, they're like, hey, I have to make a call. I want some privacy. I want to be able to play the music that I want. maybe they don't want to have a social conversation. Maybe they don't want to have to do the hey, how's your day going so far, blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, Waymo has a lot of limitations, but there's also a lot of positives. Like I said, all the privacy aspects, playing music, you can have a phone call, you can kind of be by yourself. In addition, statistically speaking, Waymo has now been shown to be safer than human drivers, less traffic violations, less accidents, less injuries when those accidents do happen, and a lot more. Hate to say, but the biggest thing that's going to continue, and it's not stopping. Here's the worst part. It's not like this is something that could get better. The biggest thing is that when it comes to the potential, dark light at the end of the tunnel or darkness at the end of the tunnel is that self-driving cars are taking over at an insanely rapid rate. Number 2, pay. If you ask most drivers, this is the biggest one. And I might say this, the first two, self-driving cars and pay, are by far the biggest two. If you look at the 80-20 rule, 80% of the things that are getting worse for drivers are those two things, if you combine them. And here's the thing, especially if you look at other parts of the country, of course, Waymo's only in a handful of cities. Yes, the biggest cities in America, but it's still only a handful of cities. So most states, 90 to 95% of areas, I might even say actually 99% of areas in the country don't have Waymo. They don't have Zoox, and it might be a while till they get that. The thing though is, the biggest thing in addition to self-driving cars, for most drivers though, that is really gonna affect how bad it's getting is the pay. The pay is getting worse. And I've said this before in a lot of videos, but I have to drive this point home because of how crazy it is. The first time I ever did a drive was in January of 2015. Over 10 years ago. Actually, if you think about it, over 10 years ago. Technically like 10 and a half years ago. And when someone asked me when I first started driving, what is the average amount you make an hour? I'd say 20 to 25. That was the average amount I said that I made in Boston when driving in 2015 when I started. When someone asks me now, as someone who knows a lot about Uber and Lyft and the statistics and the accounting and the financials, what is the average amount a driver makes now, timing this video out in October of 2025, 20 to 25 an hour. To be more specific, about $22.50. I might even round it to like say 23. Between 22 and 23, you have to be ultra specific. It's crazy that in the past 10 years, you're making the same amount. Not only that, of course, maintenance has gone up. Things are more expensive. So your expenses have increased while your pay has stayed about the same. I mean, if anything, your pay has actually gone down a little bit, not because of the pay changing. The pay has actually stayed about the same in terms of the initial amount you make, but it's the fact that now Uber and Lyft is taking out a bigger cut. Back in the day, 10 and a half years ago, it was a 20-80 split. I was fine with that. That means if I made $100, 20 would go to Uber and Lyft, I get 80. I was like, hey, I'm fine with that. They made the apps, they made the technology to find the people. It's not like I'm a taxi driver, which a lot of people forget. As an Uber driver and as a Lyft driver, one benefit is you don't really have to find the people. With taxi drivers, you have to drive around, hope you can flag somebody down, you go to the airport, hoping somebody comes to your car. You're kind of like a salesman in addition to a driver. With Uber and Lyft, the people just come to you, right? You don't have to worry about anything, right? That being said, Uber and Lyft now is taking out a bigger cut than before. It's not a 20-80 split anymore. They're taking out a bigger cut than ever before. And again, this is one of those big things for a lot of people when it comes to driving. Uber and Lyft right now is arguably one of the biggest secondary jobs a lot of people look at. Low barrier to entry. All you need is a car. You can rent one if you don't have one. You just drive. It is a flexible schedule, which means no matter what your work schedule is like, you can use it as a tool to have a secondary job. And that, I think, is the unfortunate thing, is that for a lot of people looking at Uber and Lyft, the biggest thing they look at is pay. How much money am I making? That's all I care about, and the pay is lower than ever before. And the worst part is, not only is the pay lower than it's ever have been, but expenses and just living is more expensive. Inflation, we all know things are more expensive now at the grocery store or gas or whatever. So you're talking about a lower pay and higher expenses, not good. Number 3, too many cooks in the kitchen. What I mean is there are right now, more than ever before, too many drivers on the road. Now, in the last video I posted about the 5 ways that things are getting better for drivers, I mentioned, which is true, there's never been a bigger time when it comes to people taking Ubers and Lyfts. There's never been more rides ever happening. I've talked before that now Uber and Lyft has policies that, like, if you're under 18, you can easily order an Uber or Lyft and it connects to your parents' account. I've also talked about Lyft Silver, for example, or Uber Lite, where, let's say, if you're elderly and you have a hard time using the apps, you can easily order an Uber or Lyft with the app because it's a simplified version. Never in the history of time has more people taken Ubers and Lyfts, which is good. But the problem is the rate of increase of how many people are taking these rides versus the rate of increase of how many new drivers is not matched up. Meaning there are too many drivers on the road now. And I remember talking about this at the end of like 2023. And I remember talking about this almost a couple years ago. And someone saying, and what I mentioned is saying, hey, I can predict in 2024, so this is, last year, I said at the end of 2023, I predicted that in 2024, there's going to be too many drivers on the road. And I got comments on this channel of people saying, hey, Mark, it's actually already happening. I notice now that I have to drive twice the amount of time to make the same amount of money as before because there's too many little rides to go around. On a Friday night, I call it the peak hour paradox. On a Friday night, when you typically be popping, because everyone goes to drive on a Friday night, because that's when you make the most amount of money, I now actually have less rides than on a random Wednesday night. I call it the peak hour paradox, that before, Friday nights were the time to make the most amount of money, and now too many drivers are on the road. There are too many cooks in the kitchen. And especially when you combine this with Waymos, like say, again, here in Los Angeles, not only are there too many drivers on the road in general, and you're like, dang, I'm making less money now than ever before, talking about the pay because there's too little rides to go around, Waymo's now eating up those rides too. So not only are you now competing with trying to get rides with other drivers, and it's pretty cutthroat now to get a ride. Granted, I will say this, if you do live in a major city, you shouldn't have to worry about constantly getting rides. I will say that. It's not like you're gonna be going online and having nothing for hours, but it is still getting a lot more cutthroat, especially if you live in a remote area that's not as popular as a major city, for example. There could be so many drivers on the road, it's hard to come by some rides. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And like I said, and I have to stress this point, it's almost like no matter what, you're going to be worse off. If you live in a small area, there are too many few rides to go around, and you're not going to get that many rides because there's so many drivers on the road. If you live in a major city, yeah, there's more rides to go around, but now self-driving cars like Waymo and potentially Zoox in the future are eating up and taking those rides, especially because people are now preferring Waymos and self-driving cars and the privacy of the vehicle to Ubers and Lyfts. This is making things significantly worse. Number 4, expenses. This is honestly one of the biggest ones on this list, to be honest, because it doesn't matter necessarily how much money you make in that given ride. It matters the bottom number, the bottom line. That's the big thing to keep in mind, because if, let's say, I do a ride, well, then Uber and Lyft takes out a cut, right? So I'm like, all right, and then it depends. Like right now, it could be like a 40-60 split. It seems like it kind of fluctuates. It might be a 30-70 split. It's kind of weird that Uber and Lyft now seems to have this odd model where it kind of fluctuates how much money they take out, right? So if I, let's say, make $100 in rides, I might only walk away with 60 or 70 bucks. But then I have to be like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I had to pay for gas. Gas is more expensive now. Oh yeah, wait a minute. Maintenance on my car. Brakes are more expensive. Tires are more expensive. Oil changes, more expensive. All these different things that go into your vehicle are more expensive. And you're like, okay, but after all those expenses, now here's how much money I made. And then like, oh, wait a minute. Actually, I'm an independent contractor. So taxes weren't taken out, at least not yet. Meaning at the end of the year, and when tax season rolls around, I'm gonna have to owe money on that as opposed to me getting money back. Which means that if I like to make, at the end of all this, 40 bucks, well, what I should probably do is take, and this is what I suggest to a lot of people, and I'm just, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. I usually suggest to people, save about 25 to 30% of what you make. Because you're way better off, like say the IRS saying to you like, hey, you owe us $3,000. And you're like, cool, I have $4,000 saved up. Here's $3,000. I now have an extra grand to myself. As opposed to them saying, hey, you owe us $3,000 and you've only saved up $2,000 and now you have to find a way to get the extra grand. Although I will say the IRS does have like tax payment plans. Again, I want to stress, I'm not your accountant. And I do suggest as a quick side note, if you are a rideshare driver, especially if you drive full time, hire a licensed tax accountant. It's going to be important because they can talk about write-offs, all this kind of stuff. But anyway, let's say I walk away with all of this, 40 bucks. After, let's say, driving, I make $100. Uber Lyft takes out their cut. Let's say I have 60. Let's say $20 goes to gas, maintenance, bills on my vehicle, etc. Wear and tear is another big thing, depreciation on your car. Let's say it got dropped down to 40. And then let's say I'm like, okay, well, I probably should save like 25%, 30%, based off my tax bracket, I'll save 25%. So I'm going to put $10 into savings. Boom. I start with 100. Now I have 30 bucks. That's dealing with expenses. And that's making things a lot worse as things continue to get more expensive. And last, but definitely not least, number 5, being disposable. What I mean is if you ask any driver, does Uber and Lyft treat you well? Do they treat you fairly? The answer 99.9% of the time, or 99 times out of 100, is going to be no. The answer is going to be no. And there's a lot of different ways that I could explore this, but I'm just going to say this. The way Uber and Lyft treats their drivers is pretty bad. They much so, and I kind of get it, I kind of don't, but it's part of the way the world works. They typically will favor a rider over a driver. And I hate to say it, Uber and Lyft does look at their drivers as disposable. If, like, say you get into an accident, and statistically speaking, the more that you drive, the more likely you are to get into an accident. Huge side note, pro tip, get a dash cam. I've said that in so many videos, and I will never stop saying it. Also get rideshare insurance. I've said that a lot. When it comes to Uber and Lyft, let's say you get into an accident. A lot of times they do leave you hung out to dry, which is why I suggest dash cam and rideshare insurance are two massive things you have to have. If, let's say, you get wrongfully deactivated, this happens all the time. Well, let's say, you get into a dispute with a passenger. Let's say a passenger's drunk. A lot of times, out of spite, out of revenge, as a vendetta, a passenger will say to Uber and Lyft, like, hey, my driver, they were drunk. And I could smell the alcohol. They'll deactivate you, which means now you can't drive. Now you can't work. And it might be a week, 2 weeks until they contact you back and say, you know what? We're sorry. We realize that actually that person made that up. And they get a slap on the wrist. But then you're like, wait a minute. Well, I couldn't drive for 2 weeks. Like, I'm glad that I'm reinstantiated and I can drive again, but now you have this anxiety in the back of your head, like, wait, when are they going to deactivate me again? Like, I just lost 2 weeks worth of work, which is why I suggest, as another pro tip, sign up with both apps. It's free. Remember, there's no quota or anything. Sign up for both Uber and Lyft. But this is the big thing that I think for a lot of drivers, they start to feel, I might even say this is more of a logistical or psychological thing, if I'd even use that word, where it's like, drivers now are kind of feeling this feeling of, man, I'm just super disposable. They can get rid of me at any time. I could wake up, I could be deactivated. If something goes wrong with me, I feel like I'm hung out, left to dry. And yes, there are different policies and we're not being put into place. This is something I did talk about in the past video as a benefit or ways that things are getting better for drivers, that yes, places like Massachusetts now have unions. California just greenlit unions. In addition, you might have now minimum hourly guarantees. You get health insurance and dental insurance, for example. You get maybe paid sick leave. So there are things happening for drivers that are making it a better climate overall to drive. But even still, for a lot of drivers out there, just feel disposable. And it's gotten worse. Where because Uber and Lyft now are becoming so big, because now there's so many drivers on the road, like I mentioned, there's so many cooks in the kitchen, too many cooks in the kitchen, Uber and Lyft says, hey, you know what? This one incident happened to this driver. We don't know who's right. We don't know who's wrong. And we'll just deactivate them, whatever. Or this one big bad situation happened to this one driver, and they'll figure it out. Whatever. We'll just, next. We'll hire another driver. And in Uber and Lyft's mind, they're like, hey, there's so many people driving, and there's also so many people looking to sign up to drive. We can treat our drivers like crap. Who cares?